Hi, everybody. Welcome to Truth Teller Tales. I'm Ellen, and I'm dedicated to interviewing those folks who were the truth seekers and became truth tellers and warriors during this most incredible time to be alive, all with this unwavering faith. Today is very special for me because this gentleman was really my inspiration for starting this channel and documenting the lives of these folks. And he's a calm warrior and truth teller in this storm. And he's been a calming, wonderful person to listen to in my life. And I know many, many others as well. So without further ado, Dave from News Treason.
Hey Ellen, how are you today?
Oh my gosh, I'm so good. So I appreciate you being on a lot because um just to go back, I spent years absorbing all this information and listening to folks like you. And then I loved your call-in show, and you had said it was one day this summer, someone in the chat said, because you were talking about your life, and someone in the chat said, "We don't want to hear about, move on." And you said something like, "Oh, I know, we're trained monkey." I remember exactly what you said. And I thought, "No, we do want to know about you." And then I got that message. We're supposed to know about your lives because the people like you will be studied for generations. And as to why you're there and why you're telling the truth and why you can see the truth and so many others can't. And so what you said got that God tap that I received, and so thank you.
Well, thank you for what you're doing because I think the whole concept of this show is important. We're living through, as we say, it's almost become cliche at this point, but it's true. We see it every day. We are living through a period of history that I can't even begin to imagine how it can be encapsulated down the road, but it will be.
It will be.
And we're at a point now where I think I did a show with Patriot Underground last week, and we were playing, a conversation between Tucker Carlson and Sean Ryan that had been viewed, tens of millions of times, and it was it was about everything that we've been talking about for years. Like obviously not the Q stuff, but it was about spiritual warfare and good versus evil and how everything is a lie. And they're talking about we don't even know what's real and what's not anymore. Like these are the conversations that those of us that came into this earlier have kind of been waiting for a long time. And
Mhm,
granted, it's played out over probably differently than any of us imagined. It's played out over a much
mhm,
longer period of time. But I try
mhm.
to point that out to people. Like that one interview, I'm like, if 20 million people watch that interview, that's 10 times, 20 times what Fox News gets in a day. These are the actual conversations of people like Joe Rogan with 20 million listeners and these big, they're having all these great awakening conversations. And it's, I've always said for a long time, it's hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that this anonymous, plan, this poster, this Q came along almost 8 years ago now. And it's funny to me how everything it's talked about has made it out into the public lexicon, right? And even the people that don't realize there's people out there doing all sorts of stuff. You're doing an incredible job here documenting the people telling the stories, and there's people out there doing health truth and finance
Mhm,
truth and the truth about
mhm.
the earth, whether you depending on what you believe there. And a lot of them I
Right.
don't even think realize that this was all kicked off by this one operation. And it's
Yes.
incredible to watch it play out. Just that's a lot of times too why I talk about a lot of the conversations I hear. Like sitting at a restaurant the other day, and there's a table next to me of 8 people, and they're all in their 70s, if not 80s. And one after another, they were all talking about how they had stopped taking all their pills, and they had learned about big
Mhm.
pharma, and they were looking into natural stuff. And like you're sitting there, you're like, wow, it is working. So it's
Absolutely.
for you to do what you're doing, and this is the type of stuff I think that this is going to be part of for many years to come of telling the story of how all these
Yes.
how the citizens of the country banded together to overtake this horrible information matrix that we were stuck in. And that's why I always say that for me, It just went. I didn't expect it to go into this direction or the size or anything, but that's why I'm always encouraging somebody, especially like on the call-in show. If our good friend Sean just did it, he's just starting a podcast now, and he's
Mhm.
helping counsel anons. It doesn't matter how many people do or don't listen to this stuff. It's the entire
Right.
giant group together. That's what
Yeah.
makes it.
But isn't it such to your point, such a God thing because everyone's story of their life has put them in a different focus, to your
Hmm.
point. Health, the politics, lawyer, whatever it is, their stories have so that and it's such a to me, it's so divine that it is spread out so that all corners of what we're need to expose are playing out because of people's stories in their
Yeah,
lives. It's
yeah.
so beautiful when you think about it. I mean, it's just incredible, you
It
know?
is. It is. And I think what I find amazing about it is how, I mean, everybody, yourself, everyone we work with that we know,
Yeah.
has the we form these bonds with our audience, right, and vice versa.
Mhm.
And that comes through. It's interesting. You say about like health and some of the things we've all talked about. And for me, that was part of the process that was probably most surprising because in my previous life, city guy in real estate, and everything was about cars and money and all that other stuff. It was all about image, right? So if
Right.
you had told me 6 years ago, like, hey, you're going to be on the air, like telling thousands of people the details of your health problems or your depression or how you feel that day or whatever, I would have said you're crazy. But that's, to me, I think what's for, even got somebody like Rambo, who's a recovering addict, and Mark,
Yeah.
and everyone's gone through stuff, and it's like um there's this understanding that to do what we do, like, you have to be 100% transparent, and you have to be 100% genuine. And sometimes that
Yes.
transparency is not something that it's something like I've said things on the air that I realize I haven't even told some of my friends that I may sit with every day. Yet here you are in front of thousands of people. But there's something liberating about
Yeah.
that. And
Yes.
I think that's what's so special about this movement, whether we're talking to each other or with the audience. It's like there's just this understanding that, and I tell people that when they start podcasting, I'm like, don't be afraid to make a mistake. The more mistakes you make, the more genuine it makes you. The more
Mhm.
honest you are. Like, people want to see. We're done with the buttoned up perfect ties and the short skirts on Fox News and the 9 minute. It, that's kind of the precedent that Trump set for this. He came in talking. I remember for so many years getting so turned off by politics and being like, I wish that they would just talk to us like normal, like the way normal people talk. And obviously that's what he's done. It has transcended into everything, and people now understand, whether you're in this little corner of the world with what we do, or even watching somebody like a Joe Rogan. They're done with the preaching on the television. They want somebody, warts
Absolutely.
warts and all, to get on television or whatever it may be, on a podcast, and just tell them and talk naturally.
Yep.
And that's what
And
makes a difference, I think.
it is, and that's to your point too, is people have a loyalty and have an increased loyalty because they wanna see people like them. You know, the anchors and all those were just they didn't seem real, in many ways. But then hearing your story, hearing the other stories of the people I've interviewed, people watch and listen and go, "Oh my gosh, that happened to me. Yes, oh my
Hmm.
gosh. So I'm not the only one that's happened to." And it's such a genuine closeness, and it's so wonderful. I mean, it's just wonderful, um, to have that vulnerability and to show people your genuineness, and it comes through, Dave, so much, obviously, with everything that you do. So so what I wanna do, which I would love, is to go back to the beginning
Okay.
and hear where you were born and your childhood and just kinda start there.
Of course. I was born 1978. I was born in Long Island, born and raised there. Um, had a pretty good nuclear family. My mom and dad, were together until the day my dad passed away about 15 years ago. I have one older brother that was born about 90% blind. So
Mm,
that was a challenge growing up, and definitely some stress in the household. But like overall, um, I tell people you know, I grew up, I don't know, maybe above average middle class. I don't know where to categorize it.
mhm,
My dad and my mom definitely were the kind of people that wanted to give us a better lifestyle than what they had.
mhm,
So I was very fortunate to grow up near the beach and in a family that was with boaters and that kind of stuff. So I had a pretty normal childhood, but I always say that to kind of connect that to what we're going through now, it's no fault of anybody's, but I grew up in what you would consider the ideal system for not understanding the world, right? My dad, brilliant guy, but he was a corporate person. He was an executive at a
mhm,
company. My mom was fortunate enough to be able to be, especially with my brother, to be able to stay home. And grew up in a fairly nice area, and that's when you grow up in that kind of household, you're going to go to school, you're going to get good grades,
mhm.
and then you're going to go to college, and you're going to go get a job.
Yep.
And that's just what we did. And, I was fortunate enough to go to a private school. I was fortunate enough to get in to Boston University. I was fortunate enough to be on a sailing team there and doing all that stuff.
Oh, very cool.
And I was blessed, honestly. In fact, my dad, uh, to his credit, he said that it's about both his kids. It doesn't. I don't care what it does to my own personal needs. I'm going to make sure that neither of my kids ever walk out with any college debt, and we didn't. So blessed, honestly.
Yep.
But that put me into the system, and then so I came out, and it's
Right.
like, well, what are you going to do? I ended up working on Wall Street. Very quickly realized something wasn't right there, and it's funny. I look back on it now, and I remember when I was working in that industry, I just had this feeling like this, what is wrong with me? Like I understand this stuff, I was educated on it, but like I don't fit in here. There's something very wrong. And now of course I understand why.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um
I have so many questions about that, but because I have so many questions, but I want to go back. So
mhm.
as a kid in school, would you say you were the kid that asked questions? Were you athletic? Were you A and B kid? What kind of kid were you?
Um, I I always asked a lot of questions, especially of my parents. I was always the kind of person that typically I'd probably be looking out the window in school and seeing a truck operating outside and asking, thinking to myself, how does that truck actually work and who owns it and like that kind of stuff. But um, I got decent grades. I was probably an A B, low A, high B student. But I couldn't pay attention in school. The only reason I did well in school is I have, I think people see it, this an ability to kind of absorb information when I hear it. I don't. My mother even knows this. I barely opened a book in high school or college. And
Wow.
now I understand why. Back then I couldn't understand why I would get 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours of sleep. And back then you're a kid, you're not, it's not like you're drinking or anything. You're literally
Right.
getting good
Yeah.
quality sleep. And then I would get to school, I couldn't stay awake. I
Oh,
could not stay
wow.
awake in school. So and now now it makes perfect sense because the way we teach children and the way things are presented, it was just, I guess there was a piece of me that knew it was all BS. I didn't consciously know that, but subconsciously did, because then I would much rather go on a Saturday with my dad down to the marina, and he'd be working on like the engine on our boat or something, and I'd be enthralled with that, right? That type of learning, not necessarily
Mhm.
specific to mechanical, but like I think there was a piece of me in school that didn't understand how a lot of the stuff we were being taught applied to real life. So
Right.
I played sports. I played lacrosse. I played hockey. My
Oh,
big
wow.
passion, yeah, my big passion, as I said, as I was racing sailboats, so little two-person sailboats, and I ended up doing that in college too. But yeah,
Well,
school was tough for me. I had a very hard time. I was fortunate enough that I could recall stuff and kind of cram and do it. But in hindsight, I was just going through the motions.
right. And so that's so interesting. And so in high school then, you knew being in a family that went to school, went to college, got a job, were you thinking ahead like, okay, I just gotta focus, or were you just like, let me get through high school so I can just focus on college?
The latter, definitely. It was to me, it was get through this year to get to the next year, get through high school to get. I wasn't. It's ironic. I ended up becoming closer friends with a lot of my high school friends after high school when we were in college than I did in college. Again, I didn't like go to a lot of parties. I didn't like participating in like spirit night and all that kind of stuff. I kind of just wanted to get through it and get through to, and then then you get into college and you've kind of arrived there. But then I find myself in college with the same thing. Okay, let me get through this. I'm having fun, don't get
Yeah.
me wrong. I probably had way too much fun. But get through that, and then what's the next step, right? And the next step was a job, and I'm thinking, okay, job, gonna make a lot of money, this is when I get the house and all this stuff. And then the second I started that job, I was like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
It just I had absolutely no inkling at all to stay in a corporate type of job. But going back to what you were saying, we were talking about the family, and again, it's just a product of environment. Most
Mhm.
people in my both sides of my family, even the very very successful ones, they all worked for somebody else. They worked for companies, and they had 401ks, and so I wasn't exposed to I really wasn't exposed to small businesses or the idea of going to a trade school or really any other alternative. It was just,
Yeah.
this is what we do around here.
Right.
And I always
That's
tell this I always tell the same story of kind of when it's some of these moments when life smacks you in the face. It was about 2 months after we graduated college, and I was out with two of my friends in New York City, and the three of us all got very, for the time, very well paying first jobs, right? Two of us on
Mhm.
Wall Street, and I think one was a consultant. We're walking around with our suits on and we think we're all cool. Um, and we run into one of my friends from high school, uh, and he's wearing a hard hat and a vest. And we're like, what are you doing? Like looking down on the guy, right? Let's face it.
Right.
What is Rob doing in a hard hat? He was got this on his SATs and he went to this college. And he's like, I'm an iron worker. And like we kind of, obviously must have given him like a little bit of a snarky look or whatever. And he said, and this is, remember, this is the year 2000, 2000, 2001. Um, he said, he started laughing. He said, well, I'm about to go into my second year. And when I finish this, whatever it was, apprenticeship or whatever, he's like, I get to 300. And we're like, 300, he's like $300,000 a year. And we were all like,
Wow.
you have to be kidding me. But again, because none of us had been exposed to it because of the environment we came from. So it's
Yeah. It's also so interesting. So obviously had this whole other part of you that was enjoyed sailing, took you through college, right? That to me is must have been such a freeing, completely different experience. Was it for you, or was it more mechanical? And I mean, how was that experience? That
it was
sailing.
both. It was both. I mean, it's actually, especially in small boats like that, it's one of the most technically complicated things you can do. Like you're talking about 150 adjustments on sails, wind, current, weather, other boats. I enjoyed, so the strategy side of things I enjoyed,
Mhm.
which would probably connect to a lot of what we do now. And yeah, it was freeing. I remember another good example with school is, yeah, I probably spent most of my time in school over the winter, like counting down the days. Okay, when can I get back to boating and sailing? Because that was the
Mhm.
place, and still to this day, being on the water is probably the place where I feel most comfortable.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And then to go back to your brother, so he's an older brother and
Mhm.
born 90% blind is um rare, I would think. And how was that dynamic? I'm sure being the older brother, he, wanted to be the older brother, and
Mhm.
but I'm sure that it was a very unique uh experience.
It was difficult. I've had a lot of things um, that I've had to come to grips with in my older years of times where I think I was in denial of what was really going on or didn't know how to handle it. Probably a piece of me that felt like, why did this happen to our family, type of thing. So there was definitely times, and I've spoken to my brother even in recent years about this. Where I wasn't there the way I should have been, or I might have reacted in a poor way. I might have even treated him poorly, because as a kid I just didn't know how to handle it. Obviously, that was difficult on him and difficult on my parents and everything else. So yeah, it certainly wasn't easy. And then you have obviously the things that he goes through with kids
Mhm.
at certain ages, or he had a couple of years where people were he had to be pulled out of school because kids were so incredibly mean, like in that middle school
Oh.
age. Yeah, it did
Mhm.
some really really dark bad things. But like I said, as far as me, I definitely didn't always handle it the best. So it was certainly a challenge.
Mhm. By the way, just to move fast forward, does your brother feel understand what you do, and does he feel the same way about things?
No, no. I mean, he's certainly not a leftist by any means. That's for sure. But he's he's very much into music. He's, God takes away one thing, gives another. He's got perfect
Yep.
pitch. He's been a brilliant musician
Wow.
his whole life. He's even opened at venues out on Long Island for 3 4 thousand people for some bigger bands. So he spends a lot of time playing music in different places, and he's kind of and I can't blame him. He's had a lot that he's gone through in his life, and to him, politics is just a charade. So he doesn't spend a lot of
Mhm.
time diving into any of this stuff. It is interesting. There's been a number of things uh, over the last few years where I know that he's gone to my mother, or somebody said, I remember the stuff that's happening now. I remember Dave was talking about this a while ago. But as far as like the depth of some of these other things, the Q operation, all that, I
Mhm.
don't think it's just not his thing. But
Mhm.
he's not the kind of person I worry about, because he's always kind of had an open mind. He's always kind of he would be the first one in the family to kind of go against anything that the establishment told you to do. Like I was more of the conformist. So I think
Mm.
over time, he'll come around, but he doesn't know
Yeah.
even a fraction of what we do in this world.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And so when you were out of college, right? You said you were in Wall Street, and you mentioned 2001, 2002. So were you there September 11th? Uh,
I wasn't there. I was in at the time. I had spent 2 years after college um, working in Boston, so I stayed for. I liked it so much there. I thought I was going to stay. Um, and so no, I was on September 11th. I was in Boston. I was just walking into my office like 8:30 in the morning, and back then, if you wanted television, you had to go up to like the trading floor where all the traders sit, because it wasn't like now, where and everyone ran up there, and I just remember everyone seeing it, and the second one hit, and everyone just running out of the building, because the building we worked in, if you see a skyline of Boston, there's one very like kind of cone pointed building which sticks out on the water right in front of the airport. So we're in this building and they're telling us all these planes. One of the planes had left from Boston and we don't know. We're still missing planes. So it was actually very chaotic there. Everyone, ran out of the buildings there. But for me, growing up, only 30 miles outside of New York, and most of my friends ending up in finance, and I knew a
Mhm.
lot of people. I knew one girl that passed away from my college who was on flight 175. I had a ex-girlfriend that made it out of Tower 2. I had a
Oh,
neighbor or two
wow.
neighbors that died in Tower 1. And then again, if you're within 30 miles of New York City, all those are considered what we call, bedroom communities, right? So everybody there
Yep.
takes the train in. So, ever since then, any town you go to, even my little town, 30 miles out, there's a plaque of the 40 something people that town lost. So it impacted the area incredibly. And that's why, for me personally, I've always told the story of I had two friends that tried to red pill me on 9/11 for a long time, and I just refused to look at it because I spent, and I moved down to New York about 9 months after 9/11, so it was still in the recovery. The rubble was so it's just you knew everybody, you're surrounded by everybody that was affected by this. You didn't stand a chance of even taking a chance and of even looking at it and from another perspective. So yeah,
Mhm. So the friends that were trying to tell you about it were a step back from it. They didn't have friends and relatives and things. They could look at it from a different perspective.
they did actually, but it's an interesting piece. It was actually my business partner and one of my other really good friends, and um, we all lived together in Hoboken for years. We
Mhm.
rented ski houses together. We spent a lot of time, pre-marriage and all that stuff, hanging out. Um, and my one friend was always ironically, was always a free thinker, and he would dive into conspiracy theories, quote unquote. And I don't even know it was them. He found it, and then he started talking to my business partner, who was one of my good friends, and they were trying to tell me. And it's funny because years later, when I started trying to tell them about some of the stuff that was going on, especially like in 2020 when I really got into this stuff, it was the opposite. Now it was them who wouldn't look. And I actually think what happened was I realized the timing of it. My one friend that like kind of red pilled himself about 9/11, it probably happened, I don't know, 2008, 2009, right? So by the time I'm talking to him in 2020, he's 12 years into this. And I remember him sitting me down one time. He's like, "Look, I understand. Like, you think things are going to get better. I've been here for a while. They're not." And I know that happened with a lot of like OG conspiracy theorists. Like, Mike King talks about it, how like dark it got in 2015. And so I actually think with him, he went down the rabbit hole too early.
Mhm.
Um, and probably with 9/11, I know he found his way to a lot of other very dark stuff. And probably by the time 15, 16 rolled around, he was just like that
Mhm.
we're all screwed. And so he
Right.
stopped and he went back to his normal life. He opened a restaurant, became a chef, did all these other things. Went that kind of industry, you don't have the time to dig. And so when 2020 came around, he was like, I've been here before. Like,
Yep.
and little did I realize, yeah, I didn't understand the psychology of it. But yeah, I can imagine if I had started digging into this stuff 20 years ago, I might have been the same way too. Cause he got it. Imagine being in New York trying to go around telling people about
Yeah.
9/11. He got his ass handed to him for years. And eventually he's
Right.
like, you know what? I'm just going to stop. I'm just going to go back to being
Yep.
a normie.
Yeah. Yes. And so there you are, working on Wall Street, doing what, you're supposed to be doing and their image when you're wearing a suit and playing that game, but you then found yourself not happy there?
Yeah, miserable actually, depressed, feeling sick. Just and for what I did, I got paid fairly well. But uh, I just, I'd watch these people, the politicking, and there was a I realize now there was almost a darkness in that environment. And I just didn't like it. It's just something just didn't feel right no matter what I did. And I even did internal transfers and got promoted and different things.
Mhm.
And no matter what changed, I was never happy. And it was a very confusing time because I'm like, I don't understand. Like, I went and studied this stuff. I like the concept
Mhm.
of it. Like, what is going on? And that was actually part of the reason I moved from Boston down to New York. I took a transfer within Deutsche Bank where I worked. And I'm like, all right, maybe New York, maybe being back around my friends and being more in the bit, maybe that'll make a difference. It didn't. Um, so it was probably 3 years into it, maybe 2003, 2004, where two of my friends from high school were starting basically an export business, designing products here, manufacturing them overseas in China, and reselling them through Hallmarks and Walmarts and all that other stuff. And they said, do you want to come on board as, like a minority partner? They were just getting started. It was just the three of us. And I said, yeah, let's do it. And that was the first time in my life I had ever considered doing something entrepreneurial. But I realized,
Mhm.
but what I learned out of working at Deutsche Bank was I didn't want to work for somebody else. I watched
Yeah.
just in 3 years so many people get screwed, or even myself, sitting down with some big glowing review report, 5 stars, 5 stars, 5 stars, and then your raise was like $2,000 for a year. And you're like, and then there it would obviously be your boss or your boss's boss's job to sit you down and gaslight and tell you why it's more than just the money. See, now you're next year you're going to get this, and I was sitting there. I'm like, this is absolute BS. So
Yeah.
it was anything could have come along at that point, but yeah, they came along, and I was like, yeah, let's. I'm thinking to myself, it can't be even with the risk and everything, it can't be any worse than I'm doing what I'm doing now, and I ended up doing that for almost a decade, and traveling the entire world and learning just incredible things about international trade and logistics and shipping and events and manufacturing and design. Like it there were some dark sides to it because of my business partners themselves, but overall the experience I wouldn't trade for the world.
So that's so interesting. So, I because I remember I've heard you talk about your time in China,
Mm.
um, and your thoughts about that in the areas that where you were very positive. Um, and but you went obviously other places around the world too. So at that time, your impression of other parts of the world in general were positive, and how I mean, did you also understand how the United States was interpreted by other countries? How the I mean, what was the dynamic
It's
at
a
that time?
great question. I had a little bit of an insight into China because ironically my father he was in the printed circuit industry, circuit boards, which were all
Wow.
made. It's the classic story. He was there kind of when the industry was born, and they were all made here in the United States. Many of them in the New York area. Um, and then I watched as his business. And again, to me, you clearly understand what's happening now. But at the time, as a kid, like I didn't could completely understand the dynamics of why it was happening. But his
Yep.
business went from 5 miles away from the house to 30 miles to 60 to Pennsylvania to Delaware to South Carolina and eventually over to China. And
Mm.
now I understand it was the cost of labor, not really the cost of labor so much as the regulations and and just the fact the way, and 93 NAFTA came in and all these other things putting pressure on the industry, where eventually thankfully he benefited from them because he was running things, but he was tasked with,
Mhm.
okay, listen, you want to keep your job, you're going to take this company and you're going to start this entire operation over in China and Taiwan and Japan and other things. So long story short, he spent a lot of time in China, so I had some good insights into China. um,
Mhm.
what I did not have, and even with the insights, nothing can prepare you for actually going there and seeing how other people live, in particular when you see some of the abject poverty, which does strike you, but then you also see that those people are actually happy. Like, you can
Oh,
see it because they don't know any better.
right.
Now I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but the point is that jumped out at me. Same thing when I went to India. Everyone talks very negatively about India. I think
Mhm.
it's one of the most magical places in the world. I think everybody should go there. But even there, you see the people, you see kindness. Everyone's kind. Same thing in China. Like, their businessmen can be a little sketchy like anywhere else, but the people are generally kind. You don't see drugs. You don't hear cop cars flying around everywhere. You don't, you don't see people fighting. I'm not saying none of that happens, but for me, coming out of a place like, New York and New Jersey, where you go down to the shore and every weekend you can't step into a bar without, three fights breaking out. It was eye opening. But your latter question, I think, is even more telling, which was, it was the views of other people's views of the United States that I had absolutely no clue about. And in particular, I'll never forget, I think it was 2005, and I was on one of my first trips to China, and we would travel like kind of the country, like dozens, probably hundreds of towns. That's where all the factories that we used were. But obviously, you have to fly into either Shanghai or Hong Kong. So we spent some time in the big cities, and we were in Hong Kong at a restaurant, or like maybe it might have been a rooftop bar or something. And whenever you're in these places, that's the hub of business there. So there's Australians, Irish, Indians, British, like all kind of congregating in these places. So you're out having drinks, you meet people. And I remember being with a whole group of people, and somebody said, "Oh, you're from America. Like, do you like Bush?" And again, this is 2004, so we're 3 years post 9/11. Like most people still liked Bush.
Yes,
And I
that's
said,
right.
"Yeah, of course, he's doing this and that." And as I'm talking, I look, and the other like five people at the table are just like looking at each other and laughing. And I was like, and even at the time, I kind of couldn't quite figure it out because, to be honest, probably my thought process at that time was, well, of course, yeah, they all hate us because they're jealous, because that's
Mhm.
what we were told, right? We were
Right.
told all these other countries, hate us because they want what we have and they can't have what
Yep.
we have and they're jealous. So I just kind of brush up. Now I look back and I'm like, oh my God, probably three out of those five people knew that we were in on 9/11 even back then, you know. Um, so yeah, that was definitely an eye-opening thing. A number of experiences like that where you're talking to good people, you're talking to good, smart people. These
Mhm.
aren't like mean people, but there was a disconnect because let's face it, they were getting one set of information and we were getting a different set of information. That's the irony of it is I'm standing there in China where they tell you like everything in China is state-run media and they don't know what's going on in the world. Meanwhile, I was the guy that didn't know what was going on in the world.
How ironic is that?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and because you were in finances, was that when you started finding out that, that our deception about the Federal Reserve and all those other things and the money games and Vatican City, London City, all those things. Did that when did that click in for you where you're like, wait a minute, this whole world that
Uh,
you were
it
working in?
it probably didn't click in until I started diving into all this stuff, which is really in like late 2019, not that long ago. Because I went from Wall Street to like I said, to oversee to import export, and there's a finance capacity there, and then from 2008 until 2000, just about 2 years ago, I was building residential real estate, and there's a finance aspect to that. So I was engulfed in those worlds.
Yeah.
No matter which job it was, I was working 18, 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. I didn't have time to look into any of this stuff. So it was really when the smoke and dust started settling around 2020, and I really probably 2019 is when I started listening to like X22 and things like that. But I didn't really dive into it until about that period. And you sit there and you go, it's ironic. I don't wear it all the time. I have a college ring, and I actually still keep it and wear it because I'm like, this is a reminder of what a waste $250,000 on an education can be. Because here I am with this finance degree. I don't want to say I didn't learn anything from it. Of course I did, but the very premise of what we're taught, like anything else, like the doctors, the nurses, that it's completely inverted. Like, we weren't taught anything about the Federal Reserve other than the fact that, you worship the Fed chairman because the rates do this. And it was completely taught the wrong way. And of course, they're not going to make any kind of mention about the Fed, the actual intricacies of money printing. That I don't ever remember. I just remember being told we were taking off the gold standard. I don't remember
Mhm.
anyone actually explaining what that did. Of course not. So yeah, that was just another piece of it. And then I say to myself, in some ways, thank God, I might have ended up as a financial advisor. And
Yeah.
I kind of went off on a rampage the other day on financial advisors, and I don't mean to demonize them all, but it's a system. Like you go and you have to get your
Mhm.
your CFP or your Series 7, whatever the licenses are. You have to pass those tests, and then very often it's not till the end of your career where you go out on your own. You're typically going to hang your license with a UBS wealth management or a JP Morgan, and now it's no
Mhm,
different than a doctor in a hospital. You're selling the
mhm.
products that they want you to sell. You're investing money where the company wants. There's no education on gold and silver and any of these other things. There's no education on the truth behind program trading and how the markets actually work. I came out of school thinking like, no, stocks actually go up when people really want to buy them. No, that's just not how it works. It's all done by algorithms. So yeah, it was a that was definitely a head slap moment for sure when I learned all that stuff.
Yeah. But, to your point, your life my life was the same the whole psyop with which we're in is to make us feel like we have to go to school, we have to go to college, we have to get a job. And to your point, Dave, to work 18, 19 hours a day so that way you're too tired to actually look into things and you're just
Hmm.
focused on that. And you're unable because you to be able to take the time to really see what's happening. That's the whole purposeful psyop with which we've been living in, you know what
Yep.
I mean? And so it's completely understandable. So during this time, um, when you were doing the residential work, was that a good time for you? Were you happy in that respect, uh, in that
It,
line that you were in?
It's funny, the cycles of life. It's actually what I always wanted to do. I believe it or not, when I was a kid, on Sunday nights, even from the time I was about 7 years old, I used to watch This Old House. Like I would come in
Oh,
and I'd
yeah.
yeah. So to be able to design and build things was probably some of the most satisfying work I ever did. I loved it. It was obviously very lucrative. That was probably when I was at the peak of my, let's say, financial career.
Mhm,
Was able to buy my own home, and we own multiple properties and manage all that stuff. Yeah, it was great. I had a lot of good friends that I worked with all my friends. So work was just fun, and we traveled together, and we had boats and ski houses. Again, all the things that they tell you. But I did enjoy it. But it's ironic because even that uh, eventually took a dark turn probably about 2016, 2017, right as all this other stuff was happening. I've kind of alluded this on the air. I mean, someday I might write a book, but um, you know, the saying in New Jersey is that if if corruption was artwork, Hudson County would be the Louvre. The county that I lived in would be,
ah,
because I mean, just disgusting, and there's no way to be involved in development and real estate where you have to deal with, the city planning board, zoning boards, inspectors, the state, all this kind of stuff, and not run into it. And we had a bunch of just dark things that happened by the government, falsification of documents, just crazy, crazy things. And it was like kind of like a 3 year fight, like with the government, which is not an easy thing to do. And they did punitive
mhm,
things to try to bankrupt us. They bribed inspectors to fail inspections for like crazy, crazy stuff. I could go on for hours. And so um, I was already kind of I was already on kind of at my wits end. I would still go back to doing that, but it would be somewhere in Florida where it's not nearly as corrupt. So at that point, kind of by the time COVID came around, I was already burnt out, not on the work and the business itself, but the
mhm,
everyday fight and the lawsuits and the letters and the this and if he said, she said, and find this proof. I was just burnt out. So when COVID came along, that was just the last straw, and then obviously with being in New York, New Jersey, we were the epicenter of insanity and lockdowns and masks and
yes.
people getting arrested for being out on a park bench at 3 in the morning and flying drones over our backyards in case we had more than 10 people, and just absolute craziness. And then I'm sitting there watching, guys like Ian Smith, the gym owner in New Jersey, get shut down, so I was already. It's like I didn't get how the system worked the way we do here, and I didn't talk about stuff the way we do here. But for me, it's
Mhm,
it's like I came up through the minors. Like it
mhm,
started for me directly at the local level, and so now when here comes
mhm,
2020 and the federal government's coming down, I'm like, oh no, no, that now I've had enough. I was already at my wits end. Now I'm going to snap. So it was, in a way, I guess, for where we are now, I didn't see it then, but I guess it kind of was the divine timing, honestly, because I wouldn't be sitting
Yes.
here otherwise. It was just that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And like I said, I, I going through all that stuff, like everything else, was horrible. But the experience and the wisdom and I gained from having to fight these demons in a local level for 3, 4, actually 5 years. There's one technically, believe it or not, knock on wood, still ongoing. I think kind of put me in the mindset when COVID came to be like, no, 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 this is BS. No way.
Yeah. So then what did you do then when the pandemic happened?
Um, I remember it. So at this point, um, I knew what Q was. I didn't necessarily know if it was real.
Mhm.
But I had started dabbling in it because part of my early wake up was I knew the media leaned left. I didn't know about Operation Mockingbird, right? So when the media started going nuts, actually right around the same time this stuff started happening with the city, is when we all started noticing like the media going haywire. And I remember saying I would. This is the other thing that prepped me. I remember a lot of my friends who, like I've talked about, actually that the 9/11 friend who is about as Republican comes. I mean, and he might be pro-choice, but other than that, his entire financially, philosophically, everything would agree 100. But I noticed he started like talking horribly about Trump, and I'm thinking to myself, what? How? Like I've known you for 20 years. What do you? And I started watching that happen to other people that I knew were generally ideologically aligned with me.
Mhm.
And that's where I started getting very confused. I'm like, something weird. There's something more going on here. So you get to 2019, start finding things like X22. You start hearing about Q. Pandemic hits. But again, I didn't have any. I wasn't really watching Alex Jones regularly. So I didn't have any like warning about it. I didn't know it was coming. But I started hearing people talk about it. And now I go back to my experience in China. And right away, I remember that, within, I don't remember, days, or a week, I remember starting to go to restaurants and we need your ID and your phone number. I'm like, what the hell is this about? Contact tracing. Then they started talking about masks and curfews. And I said, wait a second, hold on, hold on, hold on.
Mhm.
I was in China in 2009 when I think that wasn't SARS. I think that was the swine flu. Like I was there when they were going through it. And we didn't have universal masking. They didn't have, strict curfews. They didn't do lockdowns. Sure, you saw some people walking around with masks, but I'm talking about 30% of the people. There was no
Mhm.
like, we're going to tackle you to the ground if you're. What are you talking about? We all have to wear a mask. That's insane. And that's where I knew something wasn't right. I just didn't buy it. I'm like, they didn't even do that in communist China. What the hell is going on here? And also
Right.
something about me, I've always been why I should have known when I was younger. I need to work for myself. I don't like being told what to do. I never have.
Yeah.
Um, and so now this same government that I've been fighting on all this real estate stuff is going to come along and tell us our jobs have to get shut down, and they're also telling us I have to stay in my house and wear a mask. Go f yourself. And so I think within a day or two of all that stuff starting, myself, my business partner, and my other friend that owned the restaurant, he had to shut his dream restaurant. He eventually lost because of COVID. That I was actually an investor in. He had to shut his restaurant down, and he took all the food, and we went up to our ski house that we were renting up at Hunter Mountain, about 2 hours north of the city. Now, they were buying into it. For me, I left because I didn't want to be. People were losing their freaking minds fighting over, toilet paper and stuff. So I was like, I'm just
Yeah.
getting out of here. And then it was we thought we were going to be up there for 2 weeks to stop the spread. We ended up being there, I think, for March, April, May. Yeah, about 3 months. Um,
Wow.
yeah, and I just the more I looked at it, the more I realized it was BS. And my business partner, my friend, his girlfriend, there are other two. There's like five of us there. They would sit downstairs every day, and we were all trying to work as remotely as we could. But then I'd watch them on their Zoom calls, and they'd have Zoom happy hour, and I'm like, it would actually anger me. it really
Mm,
made me mad because like they were all talking, telling COVID stories, and there's the counter on the screen. And so eventually, when I was up there, I spent most of my time in my room on my computer digging. And the more I dug, the more I knew it was BS. And
yeah.
the more I knew it was BS, the more it led me to other things. And that's when I really fell down. In fact, I think somebody sent me something. To this day, I don't know who it is. Somebody sent me a DM or something with something related to Q. And it was like, you should take a look at this. And I think it was the Joe M videos or something. And I
Mhm.
saw that and I was like, wait a second, there is a solution. And from there on out, haven't stopped since.
So, at that moment, you were with, your friends and things. Were you like all of us, where we naively were going to our friends and family saying, "But look at
Yep.
this, you can't see it," you know?
Yeah.
Did you go through that with them?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I did. And wish I hadn't, but I did. And it obviously didn't go anywhere. And then as we I'd love to say we got back to normalcy, but I also lived in a place where we were not allowed to have bar stools until the end of the summer of 2021. So take that for what it is. But as normal as things could be in woke Hoboken, New Jersey, we were in the office, and yeah, I was trying to tell people about Q and all these other things. I would show them things, and they all thought I lost my mind. They all thought I lost my mind, and that was the point. That was one of the reasons why I ended up years later creating this community and doing the podcast and getting involved. Like first off, the first piece of it was I would tell them things and they didn't want to hear it, but I knew what I was saying was right, in principle.
Mhm,
And I remember my business partner saying to me, "Well, what can we do about it?" In fact, it was something actually tangible. It was actually something I showed him, not related to Q, that he did believe. I'm like, "Hey, look at this." Oh yeah, yeah. I kind of heard something about that, and he sees it, and I'm like, and he by that point, this is months later, he kind of figured out that COVID was BS too. Like he didn't get the vax or anything. And he's like, and I'm like, dude, you realize what they just did to us? Like they locked us in our houses. They shut down the world, all this stuff. And he said, well, what can we do about it? I said, I don't know, but I'm going to try. And because I was got so into it, and with every day from 2021 on that went by, as much as I needed to be running my other business, I didn't want to be.
mhm.
I just felt this burning thing, and then of course the election came, and I didn't know what that was. I didn't understand it the way I do now at the time. So that, and I'm as I'm getting further into this stuff, I'm becoming more and more isolated because I didn't have any community like this. I don't even think I had a Telegram channel at the time. Like I had absolutely nobody, nobody
Mhm.
within a phone call of me that was into any of this stuff. So it became very isolating, incredibly isolating.
Yes. Yeah. And so was that an unhappy period, or was that a period that you were so busy absorbing things, or a combination of both?
It was both. Yeah, got like I know it's cliche to some people to say God works in funny ways, but it's true. Um,
Yeah.
my 2020, about a month before COVID, started out with somebody that I had been dating that I think maybe a month before we were actually talking about like marriage and kids, right? And whatever path she was on, which I probably didn't understand then, she decided in February, right before COVID, like out of the blue, I'm done. Like, and hit me like a ton of bricks because I couldn't see it coming. Like there was no red
Mhm.
flags, nothing. So it started with that. So it's like we're gonna isolate you here, and then we're gonna isolate you through COVID, and then you're gonna learn the truths of the world. You're gonna become even more isolated. No, it started getting incredibly dark. Um, because I don't think I realized this. My partner, my good friend on D class, Joe Rambo, um, does such a great job talking about addiction. And we all know there's all different types of addiction, right? It doesn't have to be drugs. It could be alcohol, it could be sex, it could be gambling, it could be a whole number of things. But that addiction is always um it's always a coping mechanism for something else that's going on. And I came to the conclusion years later that my addiction during those years where I was building real estate and doing all these other things, um, was, I don't want to say partying because I wasn't like a raging partier, but it was being out. Like I would be out 5, 6, 7 nights a week. It was just part of being in real estate. Like you got to work, happy hour, we'll go to dinner here, and it was just rinse and repeat. So I was always around people, and I knew a
Mhm.
lot of people, and I knew every restaurant owner and bartender, and I had friends in every store. I'd been in this town for 20 years. That was my home. I knew everybody. And
Mhm.
when 2020 came, and then that all got shut off, and then you couldn't even go to a restaurant for like a year in New Jersey.
Mhm.
But on top of that, as that's happening, I'm learning all these truths about the world, and I'm
Yeah.
becoming more and more different than all those people. That those people were, I realized when that got taken, I don't want to say it got taken away from it. Some people turned on me, and many others I just shut out because I'm like, I don't know how to deal with these people, the way I
Mhm.
can now. Back then I couldn't.
Mhm.
And that isolation, it was almost like coming down. I don't mean to equate it, but it was like coming down off a drug, right? All of a sudden, I don't have 10 different people that I can call and say, "Hey, Ellen, let's go around the corner and get a coffee," or "Ellen, let's go get a beer." That was all gone. And
Mhm.
all I had was learning truth. So
Yeah.
it was incredibly dark. And it was that which I think led me into like 2022, when I finally got so sick with anxiety and depression that I actually called my business partner. I said, I know we have a multi-million dollar project that we're still building. I'm out. I can't do this anymore, because it got so bad that part of running any business is it's putting out fires. Like, a build
Yeah.
a real estate developer. You sit there all day, and it's like, oh, this lawsuit's coming. This equipment didn't show up. This guy hurt himself. It's putting out fires. It's just, and for me, it was
Mhm.
okay. Email, no problem. Email here, like it's. And all of a sudden, when you're in an anxious state, each one of those problems cuts through you like a knife. And so I couldn't do it anymore. And to this day, I feel bad. It put him in a very bad position, but I physically, mentally couldn't do the job anymore. I ended up, by 2023, I ended up selling my property in Hoboken, and moving back to my family house for a year. And that's when I went down the rabbit hole and figured out that I was very high in mercury and aluminum poisoning, which perpetuates that whole thing. And learning all the truth about the SSRIs that I'd been on for like 10 years and all that other stuff. So, I don't know. It's always difficult to know exactly which caused which, or if they were both kind of
Right.
fighting together. But between learning everything, getting sick, the anxiety, the depression, I spent the year of 2023, to be honest, or yeah, for the year of 2023, I spent the majority of that year in bed, uh,
Wow, Dave.
researching the whole time on my laptop and stuff. But I think I went out of the house, doctors occasionally here and there, the occasional go out and get a Starbucks. I think I went out to dinner with my mom for Mother's Day, and that was it. Yeah.
Wow. But that's so, I mean, obvious. But here's what's so ironic, you telling this story, because how I started out this whole conversation, y you have been the calm in this storm for so many of us. So it's just so interesting to hear your process of what obviously divinely you had to go through in order to be here.
Mhm.
It's amazing. And so what got you from consuming, consuming to sharing and on a level in what you're doing ish now?
In 2021, just after January 6th, I started getting attacked viciously. Now, I wasn't a J6er. I actually made an attempt to go down there. I basically couldn't get there, and that was it. But when people, anyone who got rumors that I even got made an attempt to get down to DC, I was now, and so I had very close friends of mine just starting to attack. I mean, I'm talking one of my four closest friends, like just saying, you and your friends, and they kill everybody and all these other things. And I'm like, dude, I wasn't even there. Like, and all these horrible, horrible things. Um, and that I at that point I said, all right, enough of this BS. I'm sick of fighting with people.
Mhm.
That's when I originally created what is called News Treason. I just literally built a blog, and what I would do is every day I would post, I don't know, 10, 12, sometimes 20 articles on different things, like the truth about this, the truth about that, Ukraine, whatever it may be, whatever I'd find,
Mhm.
I would post on there. And then um, I had a very large email database, which, probably shouldn't have done this, but did, that I was like, instead of going to my friends and family and fighting with them about this, I'm just going to do this anonymously, and I'm going to send it into their inbox. And if they read it, they read it. If they don't, they don't.
So
And a lot
smart.
of people started reading it. A lot of people. In fact, I could see who opens the emails, right? You can see who opens the emails. You can see who clicks on it. And the irony is, there were some of the people that were the most avid readers were the ones that were coming across to me as being the least receptive to it. But behind the scenes, they were reading stuff. So,
Interesting.
yeah, yeah. But that was it. I was just doing that, and then when I really started getting sick, I had all this time to just research, and but I still felt like I needed an outlet. I
Mhm.
still felt like it's great to know all this stuff, but like I don't have anyone to talk to about it. And
Mhm.
I don't have an outlet for, talking about how this is affecting me. And are there other people out there that are going through the same thing? I remember sitting there saying to myself, I'm like, I can't imagine that a nurse, who spent their whole life in the medical industry and comes out of it and finds that everything she learned was a lie. I can't imagine she isn't struggling too, or the finance guy, or whoever, or the
That's right.
military.
Yep.
Of course, the military,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and so I always wanted to do something more. And then I was helping out another podcast, which was based out of Australia, a Q decoder, and forget what I was doing. I was just cutting. I think I was making highlights for them, maybe being a mod and making highlights. And I don't remember how it came around, but it was early in the summer of 23. So I was still home. I was still relatively sick. Um, and he invited me. He said, "Hey, why don't you come on, the show?" I was like, you want me to show my face? Yeah. I'm like, let me think about it. And I think if I remember correctly, it was actually my mother who's kind of been on this journey with me, that encouraged me. She goes, "Well, you know, I, you're all this stuff. Like you've been looking at it nonstop. Like maybe this is a sign. I don't know. You should just do it." And so I reluctantly did, because even a few years ago, you didn't know. Like you put your face out there.
Right.
I was already the running joke in Hoboken, New Jersey. Right? And again,
Yeah.
I don't want anyone to feel bad for me anymore. It is what it is. It happened. But I know it for a fact because I'm telling you, like I got emails from friends of the bartenders I knew, right? So not even like the bartender I sit with every week, like their friend. Hey, everything okay with you? Friends of friends, which I knew that meant like the entire town, like, hey, remember that pretty successful dude that was in real estate and then he got into conspiracy theories and lost his mind and ran out of town? Like I already knew that. So um
Mhm.
I was hesitant, but I did it. We did the podcast, and uh, it was his most ever watched show. And so a few days later, he's like, "Why don't we do a show once a week, and we'll just go through current events and the narrative and everything else." And I was like, "All right, sure." Um, so we did it, and I think the first show, like 75,000 people watched it or something crazy like that, and it kept growing. And then eventually, we did 2 shows a week. Um, and that went on until early, like the beginning of 2024. And then there was some very, let's just say, odd things that went on with the channel. To this day, I don't know what happened. There was no bad blood there or anything like that. The guy just one day, just out of the blue, said, he basically said, you're out. And then there was, like three other people on the channel, and one by one, he was like, you're out, you're out, he kicked everyone out of the channel. And then proceeded to talk very negative about me. But again, I don't get involved in any of that stuff. I don't even address it. But at that point, I was like, all right, that was fun. Um, and at that point, like, I thousands of people flooded into our Telegram chat and started sending me messages and this, and they were saying, like, I started watching that show because of you, and I like the way you deliver material, and all these people came in and basically asked, and that was when Mark Abrahams and I had Mark Abrahams was another person who was kicked off that channel. And so
Mhm.
he and I had gotten pretty close, and we were talking. He's like, dude, you got to start something. Like, you have all these people asking for you. Um,
Mhm.
and what started as, just doing one show a week, has become now a
Yes.
full-time endeavor.
Quickly it has, my gosh.
Yeah.
And so I have to go back because I was wanted to ask you about your mom, but then I wasn't, but then you mentioned her. You know,
Hmm.
she obviously knew the time when you weren't well, right? Maybe not to the extent that you were, but she had to have known. And for her, I'm sure, besides the fact that she knew that you knew all of this stuff, wanted to encourage you to do something that would hopefully help you in your well-being, in your mental well-being, as because as a mom, that's what I of course, that's what I would do. And, to have that, of course, nudge from your mom, which anything a mom says is comes, it's a divine thing to her children. And then for the inexplicable way that you were taken off of the other show, all had to happen, Dave. That's why I love hearing stories, because every piece of your story had to happen. And the fact now, in a year and a half, less than 2 years, you are where you are is pretty incredible, actually. Um, and it goes to your, um, uh, the truthfulness, the sincerity, the calmness, that people are hungry for. And for those that have the eyes to see in your corner of the internet and can grasp what you're saying, it's completely resonating. And as more people's eyes are open, more people are finding you. So it's such a divine thing, and it's just incredible. And I thank God every day that I'm in this time, and that I found people like you, so that I could actually have a front row seat and see what's happening, thanks to people like you. So I'm just very grateful, and I'm saying that for thousands and thousands of people. And I'm just grateful that you're here. And so, just to the last thing, because this is what I always
Hmm.
end with, Dave. Of all the people that I've been speaking to, and everybody has a different story, and everybody has different struggles, and everybody comes from different places, but every single person, their faith, their connection with whatever that God, the higher goodness, has strengthened during this process. Has that happened to you, um, as in the last couple of years? I mean, how has that been in your life?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I don't know. You probably know as well as me. I don't know a single person in our movement that hasn't come closer to God from this, which is why
Mhm.
I always take issue when people say otherwise. I'm like, if you don't see how every person, and I'm no different. So I grew up in a Catholic household, went to a Catholic school, um, but probably like most, not most, like a lot of other people. And I think it's regional too. I think you are way more likely in your college years to remain faithful to God, way more likely if you're out maybe in the South and in the Midwest, where it's a lot easier to hold on to those values. I think when you're,
Yep.
it's not a knock on these people, but I just think it's a product of when you're in the viper's den of a place like Boston or New York City, and there's so many
Yep.
other distractions and noise and things. It's certainly a lot more difficult, I think, and you're not surrounded by people of faith, kind of the way you are in smaller town America. I think that's just a
Mhm.
reality of it. So, um, but between, there was probably two things that had an effect on me. Probably the environment I was in, and then because I have such a overly, I am the definition of an overthinker. I'm not afraid to admit that. It's to my detriment. It's part
Mhm.
of the reason I have anxiety. Right? When you're overly analytical of things,
Mhm.
if you have a moment where you're going to stray away from God, well, now you're going to try to explain things in the world in a analytical, scientific type of sense, right? So there was definitely a
Mhm.
period of my life through college and post college where I never denounced God by no means. I always believed in
Mhm.
God, but it was a belief in God. I believed in Jesus. You know, I'm going to go to church once or twice a year. That was it.
Mhm.
Um, I would be lying if I said I was a Bible reader or any of that other stuff. I just wasn't. I believed in it. That was about it. And whew, man, that changed like going off the side of a cliff in a good way. In when all this stuff happened, 1,000%. I mean, um, I have a story that I know many other people have heard, but not only all the stuff we've discussed here, which I think you'd have to try really hard with any of our stories not to say like God had some hand in that, right? If you're going to sit there and tell
Mhm.
me that 5 years ago that I'd be doing this,
Mhm.
nobody could have scripted that but God, right? Um, and all the things you'd have to go through to get there, and I'm sure I'm not done with it. There'll be more, like there always is, right?
Mhm.
The things that you have
Yep.
to go through, and I can look back at every one of those things, as horrible as they were, and directly understand the lessons I learned from it and say, as
Yeah.
horrible as that was, and I don't want to go through it again. If it didn't happen, I wouldn't have learned this, this, and this, and I wouldn't have become this much stronger, and I wouldn't be where I am. So it was all of that, and then just even messages you get. Um, I haven't told this story in a while, but I don't know how to explain it in any other way. It was it was a sometime in the fall of 2023, and I had just completed a podcast with a gentleman from Australia. And now at that time, especially because it wasn't my platform, I wasn't as, I didn't talk about my personal life as much. I did a little bit, but like I never talked about my mother or my father specifically. I had not to that point, just for whatever reason, it just never came up. I didn't want to make the show about me. Um, and I say that because I get off the air and I get an email. I see an email pop up, and I have it saved to this day. And this woman said to me, "You don't know me, and you're probably going to think this is really strange, but I have to try and tell you this because I can't explain it any other way." And she said, "As you were podcasting tonight, I saw a gentleman over your shoulder, and he was smiling, and it was like he was saying, 'Keep going.'" And then she proceeded essentially to describe my father's face to a T. My father, who had died at that point 14 years ago. Now, the kicker of that whole thing, on top of that, where I was podcasting from was the family room, kind of the great room of my parents' house, which my dad built on the house. It was like his pet thing, his contribution to the house, and it's where he spent most of his time. In fact, he a lot of times he would snore, so he'd end up on the couch, the couch that
Mhm.
was right in front of the table where I was podcasting from. And so this woman sends this email, and I almost fell out of my chair. And there have been a couple other little things like that. So, it's the whole journey, and then just some of the things. And I'm sure you talk to a lot of us. Um, I've heard and seen so many incredible stories from people within this movement of similar type of experiences or synchronicities or whatever you'd like to call them.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I've gotten, and now I do have a Bible on my on my nightstand, and I do read a Bible,
Yeah.
and I do pray a lot more, and I do, even sometimes when I can't sleep, instead of listening to Joe Rogan, I'll put on, Bible education or something. So it's absolutely, completely. I don't even want to say it's brought me closer. I'd say it's revolutionized my relationship with God.
And that has been the common denominator, and that's why I know this is a spiritual war. I mean, this is biblical times. It has to be. And it's so cool. And and it also shows, Dave, how we're just all so connected because all of those things had to happen to you. You know, my life had to happen, and I happened to be watching you, and I happened to get the thought when you were on and got that God tap from what you said. I mean, we're all so connected and we can raise each other up in the most incredible way, and I think that's what we're going through now. And as we started this whole conversation, everyone's playing their part, whether it's the moderators, whether it's the people talking to their neighbor, whether and we're lifting all of us at the same time, in this most incredible time to be alive. So I just want to end by saying again, thank you, Dave, for sharing with lots of people and for what you've done and your um, story and your show obviously resonates with a lot of people because your audience is big, and growing for a reason. And so thank you so much for spending time with me. This was so
Anytime.
fun for and for doing what you're doing. And I can't wait to see you with I watch all your shows and enjoy every minute of them, whether it's you or with Rambo or Mike King or Mark or Patriot Underground, whoever it is. We just it's a you're filling our cups with knowledge and joy and something to look forward to. So thank you for everything again, for all you do, Dave, and for being
I
with me.
I I appreciate that. I'm happy to do it anytime, and I think, um, you echoed something that I try to point out every time. First of all, like I said at the top of the show, I think, um, everyone does have their role. Everybody, right? It doesn't matter. I know so many people, very often feel a sense of despair or they're not doing enough, but like everybody that's participating in one way or another has a role, and that's the truth. I'm not going to back down from that. It doesn't matter whether you're doing a
Mhm.
show or in the chat or just sharing information. And what you're doing, I think, is incredible. I think it's documenting what's going on at this time is so incredibly important. And I also think it's always good, as you mentioned, we have a lot of new people that are coming into this movement, and we don't have, we don't always have time to reintroduce ourselves to people. So, I know that there's a lot of people that they have their group of podcasters that they watch, and they like to learn
Mhm.
more about them. So to be able to provide that, I think is great. And I've really enjoyed this, and thank you for doing what you're
Thank you, Dave, so much. You're the best,
doing.
and I'll be watching, okay?
All right,
All
Ellen.
right.
Take
Take
care.
care.
Bye
All
bye.
right.